Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. Um, a lot of you have found this channel due to uh, the series of videos that I've put out regarding the Archon mods. I put these Archon mod videos out basically to be informative to clan and alliance members, as a lot of people are fairly restricted in times. They have families, they have jobs. Um, so this would help them figure out an order in which way to farm them, as though it appears to be pretty generous with the call missions. Um, the currency is still by nature a limited resource. And I think I've done that pretty effectively. And I decided to do this summary of them as DE is now starting to patch some of the interactions. And if I were to continue to release videos about this, it would essentially be trying to talk about a moving target, and trying to describe where it is at that moment, where if they're constantly adjusting stuff as would be responsible, I would essentially be always talking about where something was and not where it is at that current minute, especially if it's like a hot fix or two later. So I'm just going to do a summary as is, um, because now that we know every Warframe has access to at least 4 of the Archon mods through the kit gun residual arcanes. Now, whether or not they're good options is up to the user. But now that we know that the arcanes can allow every Warframe at a minimum access of 4, the idea of trying to min-max a build becomes a moving target, because they acknowledge that a lot of the heal over time abilities weren't triggering correctly, and they've started working on that. Recently, I responded to was it GamerCow asked a question um, on the Titania Archon modding video. I talked about how her kit innately has 2 good options. And they asked a question about her passive, which provides a heal dot, or a heal over time. And when I tested this didn't trigger before. And I even acknowledged, I just went and checked it, and all of a sudden it was working. So they are working on this. I can only assume things like Saren, the Molt Augment, or say like Trinity's Well of Life will be something that get this applied to it as well. But as of when I made the videos, they weren't applying. So let's just do a recap. We'll go over the generic, now that we've tested everything, we'll go over the generic applications of them. Like, say, for example, any frame that has an exalted weapon, not a pseudo exalted, but an actual exalted weapon, has access to all of the elemental mods. It is literally just apply the mod to your frame and mod the exalted weapon accordingly, because exalted weapons count as abilities. So that being said, most of the frames have access to 4 because of the kit guns, the elementals. The easiest one to apply, and probably the most helpful, is the electric mod, the Archon Stretch, where it provides energy per second for 5 seconds. If you equip residual shock, the electric dot from the pillar that forms can trigger Archon Stretch, providing any frame with 2 energy per second for 5 seconds is probably the biggest utility. And somebody actually asked about that. I think it was Sheepster. Yeah, it was in a Sheepster. asked the question, and to be honest, I was glad to have it, because I had taken a break from Warframe when Fortuna came out, so I was not part of the Ketchmoon kit gun meta. So dealing with kit guns, for me, by the time I came back, Fortuna had been out for a bit, and kit guns were already MR fodder to me. Now, I have a Spore Lacer because it's fun, but I had things like Pax Charge on it, where it was just a generic build, where it was just effective in every circumstance. But thank you to NS Sheepster for finding that interaction. I even posted a response to it, and he was like, glad you asked. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm glad you asked. And we found that everything except for the Toxin mod, or the Toxin Arcane, the Toxin Residual, applied. But the easiest one to proc was the electric one. And to be honest, there's definitely some builds where having just a passive 2 energy per second, as long as you keep your kill rate up, is just a positive. Now, the cold one procs, but it is incredibly difficult because you have to kill them with the gas cloud, or the cold cloud. So it is super RNG dependent on whether that cloud even kills. And then there's a 10% chance on top of it. So even though there's definitely access there for the third one, I would say limit it to Archon Stretch and the Residual Shock. The other ones apply for sure, but their effects involve RNG on top of it. But the Shock one is super easy to proc. So let's go over some generics. If you're, say for the Archon Intensify, if your frame as of right now has a direct heal, so as of right now, say Trinity. Trinity is a great example for it. Blessing, if you are missing health. Blessing, where it is a point and you click a button, you get health and shield. A full restore if you're running enough strength. Is an easy way to proc Intensify. Intensify does not self-prime. So it would, the bonus strength would apply to your next cast, not to the blessing cast itself. That makes sense, right? But at the same time, currently, Well of Life, the healing from it does not apply. The same as Garuda's 2, where it's got the pillar that stabs somebody and creates an AoE aura. Currently does not apply. I'm assuming they're going to fix that very soon. That being said, there are plenty of frames, especially like even Atlas, that can easily use 5 of the mods, just not at the same time. Like Atlas's Rubble counts as a heal. So as you're constantly casting and constantly healing, especially if you're doing a combat discipline build with Avenger for his 1 landslide, you can keep the Rubble up for a long time. And at most, Arcane Intensify should be viewed as a potential transient fortitude replacement. It's not breaking anything. It's going to be 5 extra strength if you can keep the buff up. But there's plenty of frames right now that can use it. There are a couple where I honestly figured they would have been able to, but they hadn't. Like right now, Korra can't use any of them. I expect that to be fixed, at least at a minimum. Like the Venari heal doesn't count. Modding the exalted weapon for something doesn't count. For an element, doesn't count. But now, if you're willing to use a kit gun, Sheepster even brought it up, that modding a steel path viable kit gun is not hard now, especially with the Deimos kit gun options. You can get very strong, fully automatic Spore Lacer secondaries now. You're going to have to invest in crit, though. But if you were running Spore Lacer before, you probably were. But it's just, you can get fully automatic, like, Spore Lacers now, where it's slightly weaker, but you can make it up with volume. So let's just go over I'm rambling, but let's just go over the general breakdown. Direct heals almost always apply toward Arcane Intensify. Out of the other 4 mods, the electricity mod is by far the easiest to proc. And if you run stretch at all, I highly encourage anybody, if you can get electricity anywhere on your frame, and it's literally anywhere. Like we were using the kit guns with the residual shock, and it was proccing the electricity. It is just passive energy, and that is pretty cool. The next easiest one would be the heat mod. It requires heat damage, and there are circumstances where the damage doesn't even have to be a heat status, and it will apply the dots. But then there are times where, say like Lavos, his one, because Lavos has the ability to infuse heat onto other abilities, where before his innately his 4 deals heat. If you can infuse heat onto his 1 with like the bite augment, it won't apply. I expect stuff like that to be patched in, because that would be pretty difficult. But you can stack heat using his 4. The heat will apply twice on there. So there are certain circumstances where like it applies, but then it doesn't. Frames that came out really far ahead. Wisp. Wisp is way, way stronger now. Especially because of like heat inherent mechanics. In terms of general solo use, if you're willing to do helmets, Equinox is massively far ahead because of the armor strip changes. Because Terrify is so easy to get to 100% and it's an AoE, essentially. Anytime you hear about armor changes, you gotta check Equinox. Because Equinox's night form, day form, the AoE, like not true damage, but it's the AoE damage that's built up from like consuming health or like stealing health, or however it's stated, of enemies that die near you, is now being dealt as true damage against unarmored targets if you helmet on Terrify. Equinox got pretty insane, but it's a one trick buff though, but it's a really good one. Protea, also the frame that I'm using, opened up a ton of flexibility because of the heat mod. The Arcane Vitality allows you to deal the same damage on your turret for a lot less strength. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing that these mods allow. Is one, the thing that I'm personally excited about is at an absolute minimum, these mods are going to allow us to test and figure out how stuff is coded so much more. It felt like I was tripping over stuff when testing the mods because things were applying as they shouldn't, and then you had to troubleshoot what it was, and you're like, oh wow, Toxic Lash counts as both an ability and weapon damage, but it prioritizes the weapon damage, which didn't make a whole lot of sense because it was scaled based on what the weapon does, but it's scaled based on power strength, but it's truly coded as a damage buff directly to your weapon itself. So it's actually coded math-wise onto the weapon. I had always been doing it as like a separate, almost faction mod, and not really including it as part of the weapon. It was always like, oh, like an extra faction mod, you know. Okay, so I calculate out the total damage of the weapon. It's applied damage, you reduce it down, and then you would add on the multiplier. But I always viewed it as like a separate multiplier, not part of the weapon itself. So that was pretty cool. I mean, you get the same numbers, but it's just seeing where stuff gets sourced from the Archon mods really showed a lot of what the hidden mechanics of Warframe are. And the testing is what I'm personally excited about. But in terms of general use, in terms of playing with these, this is going to massively allow way more flexibility in your builds. Now, obviously, a meta is going to come about with this, especially with the helminths. Any helminth that shreds armor or applies elements essentially got buffed out the ass in terms of a helminth. Any armor shred is now immensely valuable if it's an AoE. Like, I could imagine Necros' Terrify being a meta helminth. Gauss's Thermal Sunder being a meta helminth. And as fun as the Nova Null Star augment is, I can 100% see that getting patched. That is a 45-meter AoE nuke that, like, on Harrow, like, obviously it's a meme, right? Obviously it's a meme, but there's no way they're leaving that in. And hopefully they patch the mecha set stacking issue now. Because basically sitting around waiting for damage cap is a boring and, though fruitful, play style. I would clearly say that this is an unintended mechanic. Because the Archon Vitality applies like 8 times multiplicatively in terms of how that stuff is multiplied together. Because, like, you'll have the original Archon Vitality, like, say you apply heat, it'll apply the damage twice. Then you'll get the multiplicative damage to the marked target. It'll kill the target. Then it AoEs, hits another target that's marked if you have all 4. And then it'll apply the heat dot again, which then gets boosted by the 6 1/4 dot multiplier, and you're hitting for like millions in like a single jump. And that's like with armor, right? Like that's a bit excessive. It's constantly nuking rooms if it can jump twice. So I'm expecting stuff like that to get patched out. But currently it's in the game. Yeah, I just wanted to do like a capstone. What else do I need to cover? Oh, there is a very strong chance Exalted Weapon meta builds are going to change. So I haven't done the math yet, but I've tested them in like Steel Path runs, and most of them have been extremely solid under an hour. Like running a Radiation Toxin Valkyr build for her Exalted Talons, right? Because of the new continuity mod, frames with melees, or say like a pistol, that can actually use Condition Overload, heavily benefited from the continuity mod. Because Radiation Corrosive is a really strong combo. You lose the ability to trash clear as fast as possible, but the fact is like, which do you value more? Killing the stuff that would actually kill you and is tanky, or clearing trash mobs? Because like a Lancer isn't going to kill you, regardless of the level. It's going to be the Bombarder or the Nox, or like the Arid. Was it the Arson Eximus? The Arson Eximus kills you so easily because the heat dot lasts so long. You have to be able to shield gate for like 5 seconds straight, or like rolling guard out of it, and then again, because there's like several of them in a room at higher levels, it's not the first one that kills you, it's the second one. And it's a heat dot. Okay, so you go out of operator, but if you're not paying attention or you cast an ability, you don't get iframes on your frame, so you come back to a frame that's dead. You know? And there's also enemies in the game now that can pull you back to your frame. So it is what it is. But that's more Zeraman stuff, where the sort of mechanics exist. I like it, but they're in the game now. So the continuity mod alone will probably change every exalted weapon build. Like, I know it applies to Mesa Regulators, I know it applies to Valkyr Talons. Probably won't apply to Garuda Talons. That's still a slash build or like a really strong corrosive build. Atlas, I was having luck with it on Atlas also. But that's less about proccing status and more about just alphaing stuff. So you can actually get away with like a cold build on Atlas. As like a secondary element. Obviously you want impact and whatever is the plus 75 against the faction you're fighting, right? But you could throw on with like a stat stick if you get like a cold element on it. Like, it's definitely worthwhile. Allows you to put Archon flow on for free, right? What else? So we have the arcanes, the kit gun arcanes. As of right now, things like Arcane Grace don't apply because it's not an ability. The kit gun arcanes, direct heals apply to Vitality. AoE heals or heals over time should apply soon, is what they've implied. But as of right now, the only one that I know that causes it is motes from Wisp. And that probably has something to do with how they're coded. Where if the motes... And this is bro science, I have no proof of this. But it's just... I'm willing to bet that when the mote's on you, it might just be an animation that it's floating around you. But the game thinks it's a heal over time from an ability. But it's been coded as a heal directly on the frame. Like, you have like a really, really strong rejuvenation aura. But that applies, so if you're taking damage or running combat discipline, you basically have a permanent intensify buff on your Archon mod. Volt came out really far ahead as well. For his nuke builds, the Archon stretch applies to his 1, applies to his 2nd augment, obviously applies to his 4. What is it? Titania can use all 5 mods somewhat comfortably if you're willing to mod Dexpixia and the whatever the melee is appropriately. She can use all 5. What else? I don't know. Like, I'll just wrap it up because this video is getting kind of long. Oh, also, for the people that have subbed and watched my content, I've actually gotten a couple of you guys, and I appreciate it. No, I love it. Where people will message me like, "Oh, I saw your X and X video." Like, the last one was a guy that saw the Gauss meme build where it hit for like 1.5 million. We were doing like a rail jacket. It was like a lich confrontation or whatever, and he was like, "Oh, I saw your video," and then he just like left, and I didn't even get to finish hitting him with like a clem or something like that. Or I was gonna do like a heart or something like that, and he was gone already. Like, you guys don't have to apologize for talking to me. Not saying you have to or that like I'm recommending you do, but I'm just saying if you choose to talk to me, like, I'll talk back to you. Because like I'm not going to be a YouTuber like a big one. I don't intend on it, and I would rather higher quality posts. And I love the viewers that I have that comment. Like, walls of text get replied with walls of text. Like, I will return whatever effort you put in. And I already have plenty of videos up that have been stuff that have been recommended. Like, what was it? I did a 55-minute Korra video on like a Korra stat stick build. And it was because somebody didn't know how to do it. Yeah. This one. And it was just because the guy was like, I don't understand this. I have no problem explaining it. If somebody genuinely doesn't understand it, or is just so used to seeing like a build and thinking like, oh, I have to do this. I personally hate that stuff. Where somebody will post a build with no explanation because they're so used to talking to like higher end players that already know this stuff. But everybody was new at one point in time. Like they either need to be exposed to it, like how it applies for Warframe, and they need to understand, like, if I'm trying to test for dots, okay, and see how stuff scales, my go-to way of testing for dots is to use the mecha set. Like, personally, me, like, that's what I found works if I'm looking to figure out if something is like truly exponential scaling, and especially to figure out how faction mods apply on a specific element. The mecha set is a fantastic way of testing for that. But that's because I sat in the simulacrum for hours. Like, literally, I have like 6,700 hours, like, from Steam. But, like, my in-game mission time, I don't even think I've hit 3K. It's all time in the simulacrum and learning how to do Warframe. So when I get into mission, I have the best time I can. And I don't mind sharing that knowledge. So don't be afraid to ask questions, really. Because if it's something I don't know, like the arcanes for the kit guns, listen, there's stuff that I know in Warframe, and there's stuff that I don't. And even thinking of the arcanes, the residual arcanes, triggering on their own without theorem. Like, I honestly thought about the theorem applying, but in my mind I was like, oh, there's no way that would work because the arcanes don't work for the other mods. But turns out they force apply everything. So it was interesting. It was something I forgot. But even thinking the residuals apply the Archon mod buffs on their own, I didn't think of that. But it turns out it works. It's more knowledge. It's now, honestly, if you run a kit gun, I don't see a reason, unless you really want PAX charge or something like that. You just need to throw on Arcane Shock. Or Residual Shock. Because it's free energy. Like, unless you have something specific that you want to put on there, or you really want to go with a bullet hose build, I see absolutely no reason to not run that setup if you're using a kit gun. It's just free energy per second at this point. And I wouldn't have even thought about it unless somebody recommended it. Because in my mind, it didn't make sense why an arcane on a kit gun would apply a buff on the Warframe. It just didn't make sense in my mind. And even then, seeing that Toxin doesn't apply, using it, that was a surprise also, because all it requires is a status effect, and there's no status effect on the Toxin Cloud. So I don't mind if somebody has like a question. I don't mind answering it. This channel is essentially a resource for my clan and alliance. So there's a lot of you guys in here, so I'm talking to you. But because I put it on YouTube, there's people not in the clan and alliance that are here also. And I don't mind y'all asking questions also. And if you see me in game, you're welcome to say hi. I know I've run some missions with a couple of you guys. It's not an issue. And to the guy that offered me to marry him for 15p, listen, I'm a cheap date, but not that cheap, okay? So, anyway, yeah, it's just, this is as much of a capstone, and also to say, like, I'm going to package everything up for the Archon mods, because it was more of a preview on how stuff applies. And now that they're patching it, and depending on when you watch this video, the Archon mods might not only be out, which they are now, they're officially out, but they will also be accessible, because right now it's gated based on what rank you are, so some people might have not gotten them yet. So they are in the game officially. They're 1 million credits each, as far as I know, to trade them. And they're not worth paying plat for. I'll tell you right now, listen, they're buffs, they're general buffs. Some of the stuff can be truly broken. But I would say just save your forma for a bit, because there's one thing that's for sure, is regardless of whether you want to equip them on your frame or not, if you find a frame that uses these, you're gonna need a forma for it. because they're all 16 capacity. So they're as much as Umbral mods. So just keep that in mind. That's all I can say. So save your Forma, farm them up. The Archon videos that I made were, like I said, for Clan and Alliance members, but obviously for everybody to use. But also for people to see what their frame was, if their frame could trigger it, so they could prioritize which mod to get first. Because obviously time is a resource, and you got to use it accurately because it's non-renewable, right? So just think about it like that. Any videos that I make on the topic after this are going to be like maybe like a big update, like a larger one. I'm not going to cover every individual interaction that gets updated, but if I find like something really interesting, or like 5 or 6 things that got changed and like an update, maybe I'll make like a small video about it. But this sort of, what do you call it, like a content arc? I don't even know. This was for pure utility. But I've been making a bunch of these videos. Like it's like a full third. And I even deleted like 10 of them. But I just wanted to say, like, this idea of making Archon mod videos is gonna come to an end because the big brains, the Warframe creators, are probably going to take that over. And if it hasn't been made, I'm sure the most impressive one that's going to come out first is probably like a Gauss Helminth onto Frost. I could see being incredibly broken, but incredibly squishy. The Null Star on anything that can maintain energy. Like, I honestly think Null Star is the go-to now on Titania for like lower level liths, where the Gauss Helminth would be better for like slightly higher level stuff because you can actually strip armor. But yeah, with the Archon mods and specifically the armor changes and how easy it is to shred armor, viral builds are probably back. Over, like, I could see the Panzer being significantly less useful. Because, I mean, if you can shred armor, you don't want corrosive anymore. You want viral back. So, it's going to be wild, especially with stuff like Styanax in the game where you can shred armor and shields in an instant in an AoE. I don't know. It's probably going to be an entirely different build setup, and if I find an answer to a question or something like that, I'm glad to post it. Just so it's a question that's answered so people can move forward, you know? But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for all the people that joined the channel. I don't know, maybe a bit of an apology, because this really isn't the content I used to make. It was just out of frustration on my side because I was able to pick them up so early during the transmute release, where they accidentally released it. I was able to pick them up, and I was inundated with so many questions about the mods. I was just like, mentally, screw it, I'll just make a video for every single frame and how they trigger, because there's a lot of mains in the Alliance. We're at like 500 people or something like that, and everybody has a favorite, right? Like, even I use Nezha a lot, and a Protea is growing on me. So it is what it is. I just wanted to say thank you all for watching. I will continue to post videos, but in terms of the Archon mod, like, hard push, like, that's over. I'm calling this the capstone, because the Archon mods were basically a preview. But just wanted to say thank you guys, and if you guys have any questions, I'm going to keep making videos and whatnot, interesting builds or whatever that I find that are useful. I'm probably going to be making a Steel Path Cascade build, because I'm getting close to feeling comfortable saying that I have a build that's on lock as like an easier build to use. But things still get pretty hairy. Anybody that's done like a Steel Path Cascade knows about that level ramp at the end. It's fucking crazy, and I love it. From like round 24 to 28, the enemy goes up like 9,000 levels. And like the last one, like 28 to 29 or whatever, is like 25, like 250, or 2,500. They go from like 7K to like level cap in like 4 minutes. I love it. But I'm getting pretty close to coming up with a build that's like a non-cheese build to be able to actually kill the Thrax reliably without a without an Incarnon build. Like there's a couple of setups that we've been using. Like say for example, the last run that we did, we had a huge amount of luck with Breach Surge and Mag. Like I was running Wisp, somebody else was on the team was running Mag, and we had divided up into groups of 2 because it just made sense, right? You just divide up in groups of two, tag team each of the rooms, and one person had a group ability, the other person had a nuke, and it made the run so much easier. So I'll talk about it. It's going to be a more team-based thing, and I'll probably talk about like the solo stuff now that the SP Cascade runs are getting done more intentionally. Because anybody that's played it, you know the Thrax glitch. It's hilarious. You'll have like 7, 8, 9 of them like stuck in midair. So as soon as that glitch gets fixed, that's just more Thrax running at you. So saying that like all the Thrax have like, I could only imagine what it's going to be like with all the Thrax actually spawned in, because one of the things that's actually making the run easier, and I'm not too happy about it, is the Thrax still count as a spawn, and at the higher levels, the Thraxes that are glitched count as spawns, and it prevents other units from loading in. So as more glitch, it actually makes the run easier, which is silly. But anyway, I just wanted to put this video out as a capstone and overall review. Wisp came out ahead. Titania can use everything, like actually use all of them. You're going to have to mod specifically, especially with her exalted weapons. But like the Lavos meme is gone. There is a frame that can actually use all of them. And it's Titania, now that her passive heals her. So you would do like cold on the melee, electricity on the kit gun. The heal is from her passive. Toxin would be on the Dexpixias, the pistols. And the cold would be RNG. You could do like a primary kit gun and put cold on that if you wanted to make it apply. So that would be the only frame that can legitimately use all of them, but it would require 2 kit guns. But there you go. So there's one frame that can use it and even have a chance of proccing anything. So it is what it is. But I just wanted to say thank you to y'all, and I know this is running on, but anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you made it this far, have a blessed day.